back to Dune Month here on Pop Culture Mixology, and today we're getting sand in more places than you could ever have dreamed of, because we are talking about the desert planet of Arrakis. So before we begin, I would like to talk to you guys about the Folio Society's 50-year anniversary edition of Dune. The Folio Society is this amazing company. They make all kinds of special edition books, and because this year does mark the 50th anniversary of Dune, they made this beautiful copy with art by Sam Weber. There's also a foreword by Pulitzer Prize winner Michael Dirda, and an afterword by Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son. There's a link to the Folio Society below, and I'm telling you guys, you gotta get this book. It is freaking beautiful. It comes with full color illustrations, and it also comes with an awesome book jacket thing, plus we have matching outfits. And I'll make a deal with you guys. If enough of you buy the book and read it, I will do a follow-up review talking about what I actually think of the book and some of the things that we can all discuss in a group, because this book has so much stuff, I'm never gonna be able to cover it in 3 videos. So now back to the topic at hand. Today we're talking about Arrakis, which is really where most of the action in Dune actually takes place. What you need to understand is that the conditions on Arrakis aren't even like deserts on Earth. It's a barely livable planet, but despite that fact, life adapts to it and also tries to actively change it. Even though water is worth its weight in spice, many different forms of life come together to form a sustainable ecosystem. Because of necessary adaptation, most species are at least partially nocturnal, and plants subsist on dew. And due, pun intended, to the planet's most famous occupants, there is enough CO2 to O2 conversion. And I'm of course talking about... They are freaking huge, like in excess of 500 meters on average. Their unique body structure and the way that they move allows them to burrow under the sand and also travel very quickly. The metabolism of a sandworm is a really incredible thing because they're kind of like a giant blast furnace but alive. Now, a downside to this is that the sandworms can't actually ingest a big amount of water. Think putting water into a gas tank. It's just not a pretty picture. Also, don't load a sandworm's ass with a potato. Just a thought. I think about these things sometimes, you know? You gotta stay on your toes. The life cycle of the sandworm is also pretty fascinating. They start out as little bitty sand plankton, which are all over the desert, especially in thick patches of melange the spice. During a spice blow, the sand above is exchanged for the raw pre-spice below in a massive explosion, and it carries with it a bunch of sand plankton. When they are immersed in water, they slowly start to transform into what are known as sand trout, which is the next stage of life. Sand trout are still pretty tiny, but they're about the size of like a leech. What they do is they cluster together around patches of water and basically form like living cisterns. Over time, they excrete stuff, which mixes with water and eventually forms a fungus. And the fungus starts to ferment and do its fungusy things, and it actually causes a massive release of gas that starts to build pressure underground. And it eventually builds so much and so much and so much pressure that it makes a huge eruption all the way to the surface, kind of like a volcano but without lava. This fungus is a pre-spice mass, and so when it eventually gets to the surface and when it sits in the sun and dehydrates, it forms the spice. Each spice blow can kill millions of sand trout, but those that remain actually end up clustering together around a little bit of that pre-spice that's left and kind of gestate into a blob for 6 years. Let's call this blob Bob. So Bob the Blob eventually forms kind of like a prenatal worm. Over the years they get bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually you have the giant 500-meter ones that are freaking incredible. So as you can see, the sandworms are really bizarre, but not anywhere near as bizarre as their byproduct. Think about oil, how important it is to the world. Now imagine that you can eat oil as a dietary supplement. Now add addiction to it. Oh, and consciousness-altering properties. More or less, that's the spice. Oh, and it's organic. The spice melange is the foundation of the entire Duniverse. Without it, you have no space travel, no economy, not really anything. And if you were to suddenly take away the spice from the whole universe, millions of people would die from fatal spice withdrawal. The spice itself is a kind of dehydrated fungusoid that, when ingested, has some really interesting properties. One of them is that it increases your vitality, so if you ingest it regularly, it can actually make you live longer. The second thing, and this is sort of like a secondary effect, is that it actually causes a blue tinge to appear in the eyes. So this starts out with the iris and then eventually moves out into the white. And if you use it all the time, it'll actually turn your eyes completely blue. They call it blue within blue because they're very creative on Arrakis. The third thing is that it actually causes alterations to your brain chemistry, which in normal cases can induce hallucinations or cause a high or do some typical drug stuff. In the hands of those with proper training and some genetic predisposal, it can actually allow you to unlock certain mental abilities, like the ability to see into the future or to unlock your genetic memories. Frank Herbert actually got the idea of the spice from experimenting with mushrooms with psilocybin in it, or magic mushrooms if you want to be a 60s person. And not surprisingly, a lot of cultures around the world use hallucinogenic plants in like rituals and other social customs to induce visions. As an anthropologist, I find this really fascinating because it's kind of like a interesting way of achieving a sort of like divine contact. But as a psychonaut, I find this even more fascinating because we actually have a lot of the chemicals like psilocybin and DMT inside of our brains all the time. It's just, when you use these things, it's just adding to it. So mythologically, this relationship with the worms and the spice actually mirrors a lot of different cultures. And this is a mythological parable about a serpent surrounding a source of consciousness, or a pearl of wisdom. We see this same exact symbol over and over again in art, religion, even science and mythology. And what it really represents is the journey inward to finding true enlightenment. The beast, or the serpent, or the dragon in this case, is the thing that we have to break through to achieve greater understanding of the universe. Now let's talk about those incredible survivors who have a knack for riding the backs of giant monsters. The Fremen are more or less the native population of Arrakis. They're actually descended from a group called the Zenzuni Wanderers, which were people that were trying to find a place in the universe where they wouldn't get persecuted for their beliefs. Eventually, they landed on Arrakis, which is a pretty great candidate because not even cockroaches wanted to live there. So they set up camp and they've been living there ever since. The amazing thing about the Fremen is how their bodies have adapted to the desert. For example, they actually have an increased amount of platelets in their blood, so that whenever they get cut, their blood clots almost instantly, and this stops them from losing too much moisture to the desert. On that same note, water is incredibly important to the Fremen, and it pretty much builds up their social customs and mores. A really great example of this is that when a Fremen dies, instead of disposing of them by burial or cremation, they're actually reduced to the water that builds up their body, and it goes back to the members of their Sikh. Sikh. I'm not really sure how to say that one, I'll just put it right here. The only time it's not returned to the entire community is when you kill someone in an honor battle and then their water goes to you individually. At the same time, crying during a funeral is seen as like this great, incredible, selfless act because you're actually giving moisture to the dead, which is like kind of crazy for them. So you typically don't see like children and loved ones crying at funerals because it's like, it doesn't make sense for them. The Fremen also wear these things called still suits, which I'm wearing right now. Isn't it gorgeous? What a still suit does is it recycles your body's excess water from sweat, urine, and feces. And because of the pumping action of walking and breathing, it actually separates the salts and the bad stuff and keeps the water and then circulates it back to you so you can drink it. So typically when you're wearing a still suit, you're only losing like less than a thimbleful of water a day, which is really incredible. This is obviously absolutely essential if you're going to be traveling in the desert. Because of this being a tightly woven ecosystem, the Fremen actually rely on the sandworms for a lot of things. One of the most common things that you'll see amongst the Fremen is something called a kriz knife, which is actually a sandworm's tooth that has been shaped and whittled into a knife, and it's really powerful and it like never breaks or whatever, but you have to keep it close to a body, otherwise it will slowly start to dissolve. which is really interesting. The spice is also an incredible asset to the Fremen diet, and they use it in pretty much everything, like even their paper is made out of the spice. A cool side effect of that, when Fremen battle in a group, they kind of have this sort of like group consciousness thing that allows them to fight as like an organized whole, which is really crazy. They also ride sandworms to get to different destinations, but I'm not going to tell you how they do it or why or whatever. I'd rather you just read the book and find out for yourself because it is so cool. Another huge part of the Fremen way of life is their deep religious conviction. Water to them is incredibly sacred. They also view Shai Hulud, the sandworm, as a manifestation of the divine. They're also waiting for their messiah to come, who will help them turn their planet into a lush paradise. And it's for this reason that they actually stockpile a whole lot of water, which they hope they can use in the future to change the climate of Arrakis. Arrakis is resoundingly unique amongst literary worlds because of its cohesion and incredible detail. Understanding the relationship of the Fremen and the ecosystem, as well as their religious devotion to changing the climate of the planet to that of a lush paradise, paints a radical picture of life's power in the universe. Another great and ever-prescient lesson of Dune is for mankind to start thinking in terms of systems. No matter what you believe, you are part of a much larger system, which any action is capable of changing. Not to beat you over the head with the climate change thing, but any action that an individual takes in an ecosystem can have radical changes all around it. And seriously, there is nothing you can do that is totally isolated from the planet you live on and the lives all around you. What Dune doesn't make absolutely clear is what is best. Though a paradise is certainly a great goal, doing so will actually kill a lot of the sandworms because of the water, and thus the spice along with it. At the end of the day, Dune tells you to make your own choices about your beliefs, your ideas, and what you're actually going to do to change the world. But what it also makes absolutely essentially known is that you can change the world. Alright guys, I hope you liked this video. Be sure to like it, subscribe, and comment below. Also, check me out on Facebook, and I want to know from you guys, what is your favorite science fiction book of all time? Please let me know. I'm very interested to see. There's a link to my Facebook below. There's also a link to the Folio Society's website below, so that you can get your own copy of their 50-year anniversary edition of Dune. And like I said before, if you guys buy this and you finish it all the way to the end, and enough people say it below, I will do an entire comprehensive review of Dune, and it's going to be awesome. I will get totally into it. So stick around for that, and share this video. I love you guys, and bye. Mwah.